Welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we do have a doctor in the house from time to time, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing we say on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check in with a trusted medical professional about your own personal medical concerns. Hello and welcome to Keto Life Support. This is Kim Howerton with episode 139. And on today's show, we're going to talk about not tracking. Yes, indeed, it has come time. I have made the promise to talk about success without tracking because so many of you have said, I don't want to track, or I don't like tracking, or tracking makes me feel crazy. And I've done a number of shows in the past where I've talked about the benefits of tracking. But let's get into it a little bit. Now, let's talk about tracking versus not tracking. Here are some, now you're going to be like, Kim, this is going to be just another show about why you like tracking, but bear with me. Some of the benefits of tracking are that you have an objective reality to check your food intake against. Just on the very surface of it, you know what your macros look like. Well, I should say, if you're accurately tracking, not imaginary tracking. I mean, some people track, but it's like optimistic, and then that's not helpful at all. But if you're actually accurately keeping track of everything that you're eating, then you have good data to make evaluations about, are you eating the way that's best for you compared to what your goals are, right? So just have this non-emotional objective measure. One of the problems, though, is some people aren't able to do this without getting their emotions tied up in it, right? They might feel more obsessive about food when they're tracking. They might feel a lot of PTSD, right? Like all of this guilt and shame and memories of maybe times in their lives when they tracked and it was done in a very disordered way, right? So for some people, tracking is simply too triggering. And also sometimes when people track, they put all their attention on tracking, on the numbers, and they stop paying as much attention to how they feel, and they get very overly focused. So for some people, tracking is not the right thing. And I think for everyone to experience periods of time where you aren't tracking, even if you like tracking, can be beneficial. Because I think, look, guys, I mean, ultimately, we're not Excel spreadsheets. We're people with thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires and goals, and tracking is it's not the thing. There is no reward for tracking well. There is no, that's not the outcome. It's just a method. And there's more than one method to getting to a goal. The goal of, I don't know, what's the goal? It's of many things, right? But like the goal around responsible eating, should I say it that way? My goal and my goal for many of my clients, or what I would hope for many of my clients and for much of the world, is that their relationship with food is good. Their relationship with hunger is good. Their relationship with their health is good. And I'm using the word relationship in a sort of corny way, I know. But why I'm using that word relationship here is that it's always a work in progress, that back and forth. It's never about one moment. It's never about one day. It's about the overall picture you're painting one day at a time. The ultimate goal is to be healthy, happy, well-adjusted, energized, and like feeling pleasure about the way you eat. And the choices you make along the way around your food are just ways that you're getting there. Now, we might have body goals, and I'm putting that like under health. We might have body goals to have less body fat, to have more muscle mass, Some of us who are underweight might have a goal to be heavier, to have more body fat, right? We all have our own goals around what we're looking for in terms of the ultimate outcome we're looking for with our body. So when we're thinking about how am I going to eat, you have to take all those things into account. And macros are a part of it for sure, but they're not the only part of it. And so if tracking macros makes you forfeit some other important element like your sense of well-being, then that's not workable. For some of you, it might just be the way that you're tracking or the relationship with tracking needs to change. But I do want to talk about a feature that will always be part of eating. This word that I want to introduce here, I'm not saying you don't know this word, but it's a very important word to think about here. The word is constraints. So what does constraints mean, or what is a constraint? A constraint is simply a limitation. So we put constraints on things. I think of them as boundaries, right? So if you are in a bigger body that you want to be a smaller body, you have more body fat and you want to have less body fat, the constraint you're going to have to apply is to eat in a way that reduces your energy intake so that you can see the scale go down. To eat in a way that allows your body to supplement some of your energy needs with your own body fat. And so when you use some of your body fat for your energy needs, you expend it and now you're smaller. So rather than eating for all of your energy needs, you're eating less and you're using some body fat to lose some body size, right? And so that's a constraint you have to apply. Now, the constraint can look like a variety of things. One form of constraint or boundaries might be that you determine what the right macros are for you, and then you design your diet so that you're eating in those macros, right? But another type of constraint simply could be cutting out a food group. Hey, many of us are familiar with this one, right? That let's say you went keto and you're like, okay, well, all of these refined carbs, they're off the table. I won't be eating any of those. Well, now you've applied a constraint that is leading to, both on a hormonal and a caloric level, your body having, one, more access to your own body fat, and two, you're eating less because you've taken out what once was a large part of your dietary intake, right? So that's a way to have a constraint applied, that you make a change. And indeed, many people, when they first go keto, don't track. They simply go from eating a steak, some broccoli, and a baked potato for dinner to a steak and some broccoli, or other people just the steak, right? Just removing that potato from the equation, it does many things. One, it allows, I'm not talking just one meal, but repeatedly, this allows someone to go into ketosis, which they will become fat adapted over time. They will get a jump start on becoming less insulin resistant. Their body will be able to use body fat for fuel better, which means they'll be less hungry, and they will then be able to eat less and they will be able to lose more body fat. Boom, it's a perfect equation where, you're just taking away the starchy thing. And if you're adding more food, it's probably a little more protein, maybe a little more fat, but you're not adding the equivalent of that potato. And so you've applied a constraint that allows you to move in that lower body weight direction. So you absolutely do not need to track. But I do want to say that there is a lot of danger in the food world we live in. So let me talk about this a little bit. For us as humans to be able to self-moderate our eating, to be able to eat an amount of food that is appropriate for our current energy needs, and also takes into account that we might have goals beyond just maintaining our weight or whatever. I'm talking about weight here. You could insert a lot of different health desires, but in terms of someone who wants to lose weight, someone who wants to lose body fat, we don't live in a food environment where we are naturally inclined to undereat. In fact, if we were naturally inclined to undereat, we would not have extra weight to lose. We live in a food environment where overeating is encouraged and the norm. And our previous life, overeating was the way we did things, the way I did things, the way you did things if you were overweight. So now we're changing that up and we're saying, I'm going to change the way I eat so that I'm going to weigh less. And like I said, just taking those carbs out, that can do a lot. That could do it all for some people. But there is something that happens over time, which is regression to the mean. We tend to drift back to average. And that happens over and over again. I see that when people aren't tracking and they just think, well, I'm just eating an appropriate amount and I'm just going with my hunger and I'm eating in a way now where I can feel it, because I'm going to just stop for a second and say, when you eat a high refined food diet, when you eat a lot of junk food, when you eat a lot of highly palatable foods, it hijacks your hunger senses. So there's no way to intuitively eat junk food. I'm going to say that. I'm going to make that statement. I'm sure somebody will disagree with me, but I feel pretty safe in it, that when you include a lot of junk food in your diet, I'm not talking about very occasionally, but I think it was like 60 to 65% of the American diet is highly processed foods. I mean, that's crazy talk. So I do not believe that people can naturally moderate their food intake very well when they are in a food environment and continue to eat in a way where they are supposed to eat less to weigh less, but the types of foods they're choosing really mess with their hunger signals. So most of you don't eat that way anymore, right? You're listening to me. You agree that junk food diets are probably not the way to go, and you're eating a whole foods, satiating diet. And so you can start to learn and appreciate your hunger signals. And then you can make some better decisions about how much to eat. And so, like I said, a lot of people, they just cut out the carbs. They're naturally more satisfied. They're not as hungry anymore. Their appetite is more under control. They can moderate how much they eat, and they naturally choose to eat an amount that allows their body to shed excess weight. But a lot of people, they come to a place where their hunger starts to ramp back up. They're in a smaller body than they used to be, so their metabolic rate is lower than it used to be, but they're used to eating how much they used to eat, right? And so there can be a variety of factors where a person who is not tracking ends up feeling a little bit in the dark. And this is the place where I tend to say, well, start tracking here. You know, if you are eating in a way that you think should result in a certain outcome, and that outcome isn't happening, then you have to evaluate the way you're eating to make a change to get the outcome that you want. And the easiest thing for me with the way that my brain works is to track and get some good data there. Now, for some of you, you might be willing to say, hey, let me take on tracking for a week. Let me just do it for a week and see what's going on here. If I can make any calculations, any determinations from what I'm seeing is happening. Because in this place where you're not getting the outcome that you think you should based on your actions, it's time to reevaluate your actions. So you need a way to look at your actions. Like I said, it doesn't have to be tracking. That is one option in this place. Another option might be to take a picture of everything you eat. Just stop for a second and take a picture of everything you're eating. Nothing goes into your mouth without you stopping and taking a picture. And at the end of the week, you lay all the pictures out or you pull them all up and you evaluate like, oh, you know what? I was not accounting for that. Oh, I wasn't thinking about that. Oh, gosh, I thought I only did that once in a while, but I do that every day. And seeing where some new or tighter constraints can be applied. Maybe you look at your lunches and you think, wow, I'm adding a lot of butter to that steak there. I'm going to cut back a little bit on that. That's going to reduce my food intake and allow me to have a lower energy intake and I will see a little more weight loss. Or maybe I'm not measuring out my dressing when I'm putting it on my food. I'm just glugging it on there. Now, just because you aren't tracking doesn't mean you aren't going to need to pay attention to portion sizes, right? And so even if you're not writing it down anywhere or entering it into an app, actually using a measuring spoon to put the dressing on your salad helps you to be more reasonable about that portion size, because it's almost imperceivable, the difference between 400 calories of salad dressing and 100 calories of salad dressing. You might not notice the difference, but it's your body does, right? Or maybe you aren't noticing that you're putting a lot of cream in your coffee, way more than you thought you were. So again, we're going to say like, okay, what constraint can I apply that's going to not make me feel crazy? It's going to make me feel sane here. Or maybe it's tightening up your food choices. Maybe you got a little loosey-goosey with some of the carbs. And it's like, okay, I'm going to pull those back in. And I'm going to, go back to a large piece of meat and measuring out the carbs on my plate, measuring out the broccoli, measuring out whatever. Maybe you got a little bit crazy with some desserts. I'm going to pull back on those. I'm either going to eliminate them or choose alternatives that aren't so impactful. So little by little, you can make shifts that allow you to tighten up your food choices. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you know exactly what your macros are. Now, I will say that you want to make sure you're getting enough protein, because it can be a little bit easy to underdo protein. But knowing, hey, I know that there's 40 grams of protein in a pork chop the size of my hand. And I know that if I'm getting 40 grams at this meal and I'm getting, 6 eggs in the morning, which I know is 30 something grams of protein, right? You're keeping kind of a loose idea of what an appropriate meal looks like. You've got the calculation in mind that, these 6 or 7 meals all have enough protein and are meeting my nutritional needs and are appropriate for my body. And then you're just rotating through those meals. You don't need to put it in an app, because if you're eating this way and you're having some way to audit your food choices versus your goals, the question you ask yourself, eating the way I'm currently eating, am I meeting my goals? Or am I approaching my goals? Your goal might be far off, but are you moving towards your goal, away from your goal, or are you dead in the water? If you're moving towards your goal, great. Then you're probably doing a lot of good things. If you're moving away from your goal or your DOA, right, you're just not moving, then you have to say, okay, what can I change? What is out of alignment with my ultimate goals? So that doesn't need to look like knowing all your macros down to the decimal place. By the way, knowing your macros down to the decimal place is impossible. It's just a ballpark. You can't be that accurate because the macro numbers you're looking at online don't know your food exactly. Everything is only right within 20%. So anyone who thinks macro tracking means that you're super accurate in terms of your intake is fooling themselves. But that is one way to get in the ballpark. And so if you're only trying to get in the ballpark, then just knowing portion sizes and knowing what your set kind of meals are, that is another way to do it. So you made some adjustments in the way you eat. You eliminated some foods. You stopped putting as much salad dressing or butter, right? You made some changes. You tightened some things up. The weight loss got good again. Great. Then I've applied the appropriate constraints and am eating in a way that is causing additional weight loss. And so there you got it. There you've got the way to not track. I will say that we're looking for a number of things out of our food. We're looking at trying to have a good relationship with it. When we feel good about what we're eating, that we feel good about ourselves, that we like what we eat, that we enjoy our food. And so all of those things matter as you're choosing what kinds of foods you want to eat. I do think that people who don't track have to be a little bit more diligent. And this might be a good thing. This might mean they're healthier. Have to be a little more diligent about food choices, food timing, and putting together an appropriate and nutrient dense and energy appropriate plate of food. Because if you're like a grazer or a snacker, which I don't really recommend for anybody, but if you're that person, you are not doing things like signaling hunger cues appropriately as well. Like a lot of smaller meals don't signal fullness the same way that a sizable meal will. And so you can end up inadvertently overeating if you're a grazer compared to eating a solid plated meal. And so there are just some good habits for everyone to follow that become even more important to follow when you're not tracking. But if you're doing these things well, like thinking about your meal in advance, knowing how to put together a good meal for you. Remember what I mentioned, like knowing what the 6 or 7 meal rotation looks like, that it's well balanced, that it has an appropriate amount of protein, an appropriate amount of energy, meets your happiness needs and your nutritional needs. And knowing what those plates are going to look like, then it's just rinse and repeat. It's just keep eating that way. I think there can be a lot of benefit to just knowing the right things to eat for your body and then eating those things and then doing it again and then doing it again. And then if you notice, wow, I've stopped seeing the outcomes that I want to see. Well, then it's time to do an audit. And for that, it looks like either, like I said, taking pictures is one way to do it of all your meals. The second way would be just get a little journal and write down everything you eat. So not putting it in a tracker or anything like that. No, like triggering MyFitnessPal, which I don't like anyway. Chronometer is better. You're just evaluating like, okay, what am I actually eating? Or if you know there are habits that take you down the wrong track, just eliminating those habits. Like maybe you don't need to actually do an audit. You're like, I know what I'm doing. I'm eating nuts by the handful in the afternoon. Okay, stop doing that. See if the weight loss restarts, right? So there's like maybe a habit or timing audit. But you have to, if things aren't going the way that you want them to, you have to stop and evaluate what you're doing to see what you can change. So if that change isn't going to be macro based, then it has to be based in either food choices, food quantities, habits, which really is about food quantities and food types, and give yourself an honest assessment of what you're doing well and what needs improvement. Make the change, make a shift, and then see what happens from there. Because ultimately, as I started this podcast with, we're not trying to be the best at macro tracking. We are trying to be the healthiest, happiest food-related us that we can be. And so I just wanted to put it out there that no, tracking is not the only way to do that. I would like to say that some people experience any type of constraints as very troubling. And not just any type, but food quantity constraints. Some of us went keto because maybe we had a big appetite. And in the past, we'd always felt like to lose weight, we were told to restrict our calories in a way that left us hungry all the time. And when we went keto, we ate until we were satisfied or comfortably stuffed. And that worked great for a while. And then now when we eat until we're satisfied, we're not losing weight anymore. And it can feel very triggering to think, oh, do I have to be hungry? Am I going to have to eat less so that I can lose more of this weight? And so sometimes that can feel really challenging to make those kinds of shifts. And there's where some other potential tactics can come in. You might want to listen to my satiety podcast. I'll put the number of that one. It wasn't very many ago in the podcast notes, but making food choices that allow you to feel a high level of satiety. And for some of us, that might mean making some different food choices. For me, when I was in this dilemma, I actually upped mostly my lettuce and cucumbers. I added more lettuce and cucumbers to my diet. So I got more volume, I got more chewing, I got more bulk without adding a lot of calories. I'm not saying that those are the two magic foods. I'm just saying for me, that worked. I was less hungry. I felt more satisfied by my food when I had to reduce my caloric intake, I had to find other ways where I was going to feel a little balance in terms of my food intake. So this episode is not really about that, about how to make these different food choices. What this episode really is about is acknowledging that if you're trying to lose weight or meet a health goal, while macro tracking is a very helpful tool, we don't all need the same tools and we don't all benefit from doing things the exact same way. And that applying other types of constraints can be helpful in terms of changing the way that you eat. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'll do some follow-ups if you have questions. So if you have questions about this or any other topics, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. Take care and have a fabulous week.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Keto Life Support. Want more information? Want show notes? Want to suggest a topic? Just head over to ketolifesupport.com. That's where all that kind of thing can go on. By the way, I have a request. If you could go to your podcast host and hit subscribe, we would really, really appreciate it. And what would be even more awesome is if you could write a review. And what would be even more awesome than that is if you could write like a really flattering review. Just asking, you do you. All right. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're part of the Keto fam. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.